Hello and welcome back to the Micro Advice Podcast. Today, our focus is on helping customers achieve results at their jobs. To better understand this concept, we are here with Jay Haynes. Jay is the founder and CEO of Thrive.com, the first and only jobs-to-be-done software for product, marketing, and sales teams. Jay, thanks so much for being here today.
Thanks, Jim. Great to be here.
I'm excited to speak with you about this interesting concept. So let's get started with some context for the listening audience. Jobs to be done product management helps CEOs focus their company's product development while better understanding the views of the customer. So, Jay, you have some background in this. As I understand it, you've led or have been at the helm of 7 different companies now, invested in countless others, served as an adjunct professor at the Presidio School of Management. Through all of this, how did you arrive at this concept of jobs to be done?
Yeah, that's great. And that reminds me of how old I am. So the concept of thinking about the customer's job and what goal they're trying to achieve and what problem they have has actually been around for a long, long time. Thomas Edison even said what he worked on was trying to figure out the utility of something. And it really dates back to Theodore Levitt in the 1960s, who was famous for saying that customers don't want a quarter-inch drill, they want a quarter-inch hole. In other words, the basic concept behind jobs to be done is, as Clay Christensen, also from the Harvard Business School, put it, your customers are actually not buying your products. They don't really care about products. What they care is about what's now known as getting their job done. So what they're really doing is hiring your product to get a job done. So if you're a company building products and services to generate revenue and profitability growth, the key is really understanding where customers struggle to get a job done. That's the core idea, and from there it gets very, very detailed, and it can be kind of complex once you start to look at all the data. But the core idea is deceptively simple. It's that you should focus not on your product, which seems ironic for product teams, of course. You should focus on your customer's job and what they're trying to do with your product. And history is just littered with examples of companies that didn't think this way and then ultimately went bankrupt. I mean, if you think of Encyclopedia Britannica, once the dominant source of information, obviously they missed the opportunity for web searching, which is now dominated by Google. Kodak, which thought they were in the film business, missed the opportunity for sharing memories, which is now dominated by Facebook. And even more recently, BlackBerry, of course, was just the dominant mobile device, and they missed the opportunity to help people get jobs done better while mobile, which is now, of course, dominated by Apple. So it's really important for teams and companies to think about their customers in this way.
Okay, that is really fascinating background and some great examples there, I think, to help put this in context. So, Jay, based on your experience, what are 1 or maybe 2 leading causes of customer pain points in using a tool or service to do their job effectively?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the way you can analyze those pain points is by first mapping out what is the job that you're helping them do. And we spend a lot of time with companies helping them just answer that question. What really is the job? And when you're trying to figure out pain points, it's important that you use metrics to measure them. And you can think about every customer is a real human. Even if you're selling to a business, you're selling to a human at that business. And people are very, very busy and stressed out. And what they really want to do is accomplish their goals as fast and accurately as possible. So when we look at customer struggles, we're not asking them vague questions like, are you satisfied? How do you feel? Now, those things can be very important, and we can have a discussion about those. But when you're looking at the functional thing they're trying to achieve, and I'll give you some examples. In consumer markets, consumers are trying to create a mood with music, right? They're trying to get to destinations on time. If you're a parent, you're trying to get a baby to sleep through the night. All of those things are jobs to be done because they're independent of solutions. And it's true for B2B markets. So if you're trying to acquire customers or optimize your cash flow or generate more leads, all of those are goals that you're trying to achieve independent of whatever software you might be trying to use today to achieve those goals. And so if you're really going to look at your customers, you should look at how fast and how accurate it is for them to achieve those goals using your competitors' products, because this is stuff you can actually measure. And once you have those measurements and you have that assessment of your customer struggle, the beauty of that is that determines your product strategy. and that determines how to prioritize your roadmap. Often when we work with companies, we ask them, how are you prioritizing your product roadmap? And usually the answer is some sort of debate, the politics behind the scenes, what executive has the authority and the budget, et cetera. And we like to say, well, actually, you at your company, you shouldn't prioritize your product roadmap. Your customers should. Their struggles should be your top priority. That is why they're going to buy more of your product or service, because you're helping them overcome their struggle faster and more accurately.
Just curious, as a follow-up, do companies resonate well with that whenever you explain to them some of the different ways they can be prioritizing their product roadmap? Are they receptive to that feedback?
Yeah, I think so. If you're at some startup and you've got, the next Twitter or YouTube and you're growing like crazy, you probably don't have that problem, because you've all of a sudden lucked into something that's just, growing virally or, whatever. Those are very, very rare exceptions. Most companies are struggling to hit their growth goals. And that's where they generally seem to be more receptive to new ways of thinking about their product strategy and product roadmap. Because if they projected we're supposed to grow 20% and you only grow 15 or 10 or 8%, right? Okay, why is that growth not appearing in your numbers? Well, it's usually because customers don't want your product, or they don't want it as much as you thought they would. And a good example of this is, we use this example all the time, is the Microsoft Zune, all right? So a team at Microsoft looked at the iPod market. Half of Apple's revenue was the iPod back in the day, and it seemed like a huge market. If you use traditional thinking and define the market by the product, the iPod market was huge. It was $30 billion. Apple sold 200 million iPods at $150 a pop. That's a big market, even for Microsoft. So they get a product team and they say, let's build a competitor to the iPod. So they make a Zune, and it looks and works just like an iPod. It actually has a podcasting feature. And they're Microsoft, so they've got 1 billion customers. They've got an operating system they can connect it to, incredible marketing, obviously lots of engineering resources, they can throw at it. So they throw a ton of money at it, and it literally is an unbelievably huge failure. I don't know if you owned one. Occasionally we find someone who, got it in a promotion for free, but the Zune was a huge, huge failure. So the question is, why does that happen? Well, the answer is, it didn't do anything faster or more accurately than the iPod. It was very, very similar, so it wasn't creating customer value. And this is the way we think about Jobs to be Done. It's ultimately a risk mitigation system, because your company is going to invest dollars in product development, sales, and marketing of what's in your roadmap. And those dollars can be very expensive. If you're a company like Microsoft, those dollars are measured in billions. You might be hundreds of thousands of your company, or tens of millions, but still a lot of money is invested in failed products. So Jobs to be Done helps you mitigate that risk, because it says, okay, what is the customer value we're creating? Why is someone going to buy our new music product instead of using an iPod? Well, it's got to be faster or more accurate in some dimension. And what's interesting is, right when the Zune launched, the iPod market was falling off a cliff. The growth rate of iPods was just plummeting, and a new competitor called Pandora was signing up 90,000 people a day. Now, that is fast growth, however you measure it. And of course, streaming services came to dominate. And right. Why? Well, because what did it take to create a mood with music with Pandora? You log in, push a button. That was it. I mean, think about all you had to go through. I'm old enough, I own records and 8 tracks and all these ancient things. But to create a playlist, to create a mood for music, I had to go to a record store, unpack the record, get a cassette, figure out which song I wanted, then put on another record. You could measure that in hours. And even with an iPod, you had to go to the music store, you had to find music you like, you had to buy it, then download it to your iPod and create your own playlist. It's still a long time. With Pandora, it was instantaneous. Just push play, and Pandora's algorithms were going to create a playlist that was probably pretty accurate in the mood you were feeling.
Jay, you had mentioned the last time we spoke something that really stuck with me, and I found it to be fascinating. I was hoping you can extrapolate upon that here. You had mentioned that a job can be broken into 3 different elements, which are functional, consumption, and emotional. So what is an example of these, and how can companies achieve implementing all 3 of these for their customers'
Yeah, that's
through
a
their
great
product
question.
and service.
So we're all humans. So of course we have, functional goals to achieve, and those functional goals are things like get a baby to sleep through the night, or get to a destination on time, or if you're a cardiovascular surgeon, restore artery blood flow. But those are all very, very functional. But also we're humans, so we have emotions, and generally our emotions range from extremely anxious and stressed out to extremely confident and relaxed. And those are actually jobs as well. So let me give you a concrete example. If you're trying to get to destinations on time, which is the job we hire Apple and Google Maps to do, every day, you're also experiencing emotional jobs. And in that case, you're trying to avoid being perceived as unprofessional by your colleagues, right? Because if you show up to an important meeting late, people are going to be like, well, that Jay guy showed up 10 minutes late. That's pretty disrespectful of all the people in this meeting who were here on time. So that's an emotion. And then finally, there's what we call consumption jobs. And there's some great work by Rita McGrath at MIT about this. But consumption jobs relate to using a product. So a good example is a consumption job is learning how to install the product or use it or maintain it or purchase it. Now, the reason we separate those are all very, very important, because obviously if you can't interface with the product or learn to use it, or purchasing is really hard, you're not, as a company, you're not going to succeed with your customers. But no one wakes up in the morning and says, I need to interface with a software application. That's not a human goal. The goal is to get to destinations on time. And if you can't interface with the application to get to a destination on time, you're not going to get that job done, and you're probably going to be pretty anxious that you're going to be, late to your meetings. So the best customer experience is all three of those things coming together. But we like to start always with the functional job, because that's really the market. The market is really the underlying functional job, the goal you're trying to achieve. Now, let me give you a good example of that. Craigslist, which we all probably know well, has an absolutely terrible interface. It looks like it was built in the late 90s, because it was. And it doesn't adhere to any kind of modern UX, UI, great design principles. It really is just a horrible interface. But the issue with Facebook is it gets the job done. The functional job is to buy and sell stuff, right? So it has what's known as liquidity. If you go onto Facebook and you're trying to sell your car, buy a used car, you're probably going to find something there, because there's enough, liquidity. There are enough buyers and sellers that you have a high probability of actually getting the job done. So if you're going to compete with Craigslist, having a good interface isn't enough. It's not just – people don't switch because it looks good. They switch because it helps them get a functional job done. And that's critical, bringing all three of those things together to make great products.
And that is an incredible example. And I know exactly what you're saying about Craigslist. Very beneficial, but doesn't necessarily meet some of the other standards, but you still achieve exactly what it is you set out to achieve using Craigslist. So I can see why it's lasted all these years. Jay, so I love what you're talking about here, and you've given some great examples so far. Can you share any stories where maybe you've seen companies turn a negative customer experience into a positive one by starting to focus on their customers' jobs?
Great. I'll give some
to be
examples
done?
that your listeners probably can relate to. We helped Target, and we're going to publish a case study on this pretty soon, compete with Amazon. So two companies that your listeners are probably aware of. And Amazon is a fierce competitor. If you're competing with Amazon, that can be terrifying. So they were competing in the registry space, so baby registry and wedding registry, and Amazon was taking share. And what we did with them is to help them think through this and say, okay, what are people really hiring a registry to do? A registry is a product, and it's really helping people buy gifts and give gifts and receive gifts. So those are jobs. You can study gift giving on both sides, the giver and the sender of the gift, and figure out what is difficult about that. Why do people struggle to choose a gift and give a gift? And that's also very emotional. Someone has a new baby and you want to get them something that's really useful and they remember it and they feel good about it. And even if you're a gift receiver, just figuring out what do you need, how do you choose what you want to send people to say, this is what I need as a new parent or, a newly married person, et cetera. So the key to the method and the process is that everything in those jobs is measurable. So you can start out not with Jay or Jim's crazy ideas. You don't start with ideas. You actually start with understanding the customer's struggle and their problem. And then ideas are relatively easy to create. I mean, you and I could spend the next 10 minutes and come up with 50 ideas in any market we were thinking about, right? Well, which ideas are going to create the most value?
Right.
And that's what you really want to know. You don't want to generate more ideas as a product team. You want to generate the best idea to help the customer with their biggest problems. So once you've got that in focus, you can really hone in it. And Target was very successful with this. They took back leadership in registry from Amazon. So and that's a market that people are probably pretty familiar with. We work in a lot of business to business and medical markets too that are a little bit more obscure for the average person. But the same principles, the same method work in those markets.
Well, that is fascinating. So, Jay, I want to dig in a little bit deeper. What are kind of some reasons maybe that companies aren't delivering a stronger CX? Because everything you've explained here today, to me, makes total sense around focusing on the job, focusing on the outcome. But I was reading a report the other day that something like 60+% of companies still aren't getting the feedback that they're nailing the customer experience. So from your perspective, what are one or maybe two barriers to preventing companies from really driving that superior CX?
Ironically, I think the biggest barrier to doing this correctly is listening to your customers. Now, what do I mean by that? I don't want people to stop listening to their customers, but there are methods out there like voice of the customers or ethnography or even journey mapping. And the problem with those methods is, for example, with voice of the customer, you can listen to your customer. They can just ramble on about anything. They could be talking about their in-laws or the fact that they don't like your button is blue. They think it should be red. And those are all interesting, but they don't have anything to do with the underlying job that they're hiring your product for. So so people and companies do this all the time. I mean, you've probably seen it too, where customers will be requesting something. They're like, I know you have a red button, but I really want it to be blue. And then the team goes out and they build a blue button and then no one buys it. Well, it turns out no one cares if the button is red or blue. The underlying need in the job they're trying to get done is what the struggle is. So what we train companies to do is basically to really learn how to listen to their customers. And the interesting thing is you're not really analyzing an individual customer. What you're analyzing is the job you're trying to get done. And I can give you an example of this. So if you were to try and beat Apple and Google Maps, what would you do? Well, the traditional product team would get together and they'd be like, wow, we need to come up with some breakthrough idea to beat Apple and Google Maps. So let's come up with a lot of ideas. So the chances of that working, we know, are extremely small because most new products and most product development efforts don't meet their goals. They fail. So the jobs to be done approach to that is totally different. You wouldn't start and say, well, what customer experience is going to be Apple and Google Maps? You would start and say, well, what are people hiring Apple and Google Maps to do? And you'd say, well, they're hiring it to get to a destination on time. So let's look at that job. So then when you're talking to customers, you're trying to figure out everything that's involved in getting to a destination on time. And this job, it's incredibly complex. And people can go to our site and see the job broken down. It's got 16 different steps and 106 different customer needs just to get to a destination on time. It's extraordinarily complex. And that's true of every job in B2B or B2C or medical markets. But they're known. You can know every step and every customer need in getting to a destination on time. So that's the first step, is making sure you really have that complete set of job steps and needs that define the customer's job.
I had no idea it took that many steps.
Yeah, well, let me clarify too.
A mapping tool.
The tool, incredible. The goal of the product is to help you get that job done with the push of a button, right? So you don't have to go through all these steps. And that's actually a key difference, since you were asking about customer experience. If you're mapping the journey, which we've seen companies do, and there's some real value to that. But if you're looking at it and you're saying, well, how do people use Apple and Google Maps today? That's actually a secondary question. What we're trying to ask is the primary question is, what does it take to get to a destination on time? And that's where you get to the 15, 16 steps and 100 or so needs. And the reason that that's important is because now you can get quantitative data through a survey that says, okay, where are people struggling? If there's 15 steps and 100 needs or so, where do we focus? Which segment of the market is struggling with some portion of this job? And I can give you the answer because we've actually done this research. If you look at getting to a destination on time, who struggles the most? Well, it turns out it's people who have frequent and unfamiliar stops, like, traveling salespeople or, medical professionals who are on the road or delivery people, et cetera. If you're just got the same routine every day, you're probably totally satisfied with Apple and Google Maps. Occasionally you need to find like a new location, that's fine. But if you've got 4 or 5 meetings every day out on the road in places you don't know where to go every day, you're at a high stress level and you struggle because there is no feature within Apple or Google Maps that says, just optimize my day. Here's my calendar. I got 5 places to be in a city I don't really know. Just tell me where to go first, second, third. You can't do that automatically with Apple and Google Maps, which is amazing. Even 2 companies the size of Apple and Google, there is market opportunity to beat them. Because if you think about the customers, now I haven't had any product ideas how we're going to solve this problem because there's probably some detailed technical algorithmic work we need to do to make that really work. But at least now we know there is a problem. It is a struggle. We can measure it. There's a large segment. They're willing to pay to get the job done. All those first questions that you want to ask before you write 1 line of code or invest $1 in product development, you want to make sure you answer all those questions about the customer's problem. And that'll lead to great customer experience. Because if you can solve those things faster and more accurately, you're on the path.
Boy, that's incredible. I love that example. Jay, so final question for today. I could speak with you all day. I love this stuff. This is incredible insight. So thrilled you're sharing this. But for the final question today, given your experience, what are some companies doing that you've seen, or what can they do to maybe prevent a good customer experience from going awry?
I think the best thing that you can do as a company is to really plan your product strategy and your product roadmap around your customer's job. And the reason I say that is there's usually not one thing that is the huge home run success. It is all of these incremental improvements that continually get the job done faster and more accurately. And that also can give companies a kind of early warning system or a radar when a competitor's emerging that's going to get the job done much better and that they should respond to. So I'll give you some concrete examples of that. BlackBerry is the obvious one, right? BlackBerry, people forget, BlackBerry's market cap was 4 times bigger than Apple. They were 4 times bigger than Apple when Apple launched the iPhone. And they obviously did not see the threat from the iPhone. And even Steve Ballmer, Microsoft, famously said, oh, the iPhone, who's going to pay $600 for a phone? Well, the reality, it's a phone in name only. It's a platform for getting an enormous number of jobs done. And what people didn't see is that Apple had this incredible roadmap that they were just going to keep working at in every release. They were going to add applications to it. They were going to continue to make it faster. They were going to continue to have developers make more applications. I mean, think of all the things you can do on your phone today. It's extraordinary. You can almost live your life on your phone. So that gives companies the ability to have that kind of early warning radar. And this is true in a lot of markets. Nest is a great example. We love the Nest example because initially when Nest launched, the incumbent thermostats, just like the iPhone, and not surprised the Nest was launched by an Apple executive, but they dismissed it because they said, well, we sell thermostats for $30 and contractors install them all. And so why are we worried about this Nest thing that costs $250? Who's going to buy a thermostat for $250? Well, the answer is no one's buying a thermostat. They're buying a solution to help them achieve comfort in their home. And you may remember before Nest, thermostats were just horrible. Oh, sure, just set up here all these different times and you're going to save all this money and your energy and you're going to be more comfortable. And no one did that because the interfaces were terrible and they didn't really work. So, of course, when Nest came out, they changed the entire market because what people are willing to pay for is to get a job done. They're not paying for a product. They're not buying your product. They're hiring it to get a job done. So there can be tremendous market opportunities out there that companies can't see until they really put themselves in their customers' shoes and really understand what people are willing to pay to get the job done rather than what they're currently purchasing as a price for a product in the market today.
Jay, thank you so much for this amazing insight. And thank you all for listening. If you have any thoughts on a customer experience podcast topic, please feel free to drop me a line on LinkedIn. As always, you can find this and many other episodes on YouTube, Spotify, and iTunes. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe for other great CX insights. Have a great week. We'll see you right back here, same place, same time next week.